Well, good morning, and welcome to our first session of the 5 by 22 mini series. My name is Christy Mora, and I am on the team here at Generis. And our session this morning is led by Dave Travis. Dave is strategic counsel to pastors and church boards on Generis's effective ministry team. And today he's going to be covering 4 things to do in 2022 to help your legacy planning. So, Dave, our promise is 22 minutes. I have my coffee. Let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, thank you, Christy. Hey, everyone, we all leave a legacy, and that legacy can be good, and it could be bad. Most pastors that I see leave an unintentional legacy. They don't think about their legacy. They carry out their ministry in most in God-honoring ways, but they rarely think about what they're going to leave behind. So whether you're a mid-career pastor or a late season pastor, there are things you can do, I believe, in 2022 to prepare for a great legacy season. I'm going to share today just 4 principles and tools and action steps that you can take in the very near future in 2022 that will lead you to productive future ministry seasons. We have several tools that we use to help pastors. This is very important in order for you to be productive in your own ministry, but also for your church to be successful in the future. I'm going to share some slides here. So here we go. Let me get them up on the screen. And hit the present button. Great. I hope you can see my slides. 4 things to do in 2022. If you have questions, and I know some of these questions, because of the topic we're discussing, you probably want to ask them privately. You don't want them to be acknowledged publicly. Just send me an email, dave.travis@generis.com. I'd be happy to answer questions for you privately, even set up a conversation if you want to. So there's 2 big legacy things that we're talking about. One is your personal legacy. I call that the Pastor Legacy Life Plan. Some of you would have received a book in the mail recently that I wrote that's called Pastor Legacy Life Plan. If you didn't get a copy, and if you want a free copy, it's a paperback book. It's about 100 pages, but it's really small. Hang on, let me grab one. I should have had this ready. It says Pastor Legacy Life Plan. You can read that in about 45 minutes. It's really focused on you, the pastor, mid-career, mostly thinking about your future legacy season. It's to help you develop a personal legacy plan for you and your family. It's about building vivid vision, healthy habits, consistent cadences, and to get you to leveraged impact. The second process that I work on is about pastor smart succession. My core work at Generis is working with long-term senior pastors, and it's really focused on the congregation in the church. The pastors are involved, the spouses of the pastors are involved, the staff, the board, but the whole congregation is really the client. This is usually focused on a pastor within 5 years of stepping down. Now, quite frankly, in the last year, I've worked with 3 churches with pastors in their 40s and 50s who have stepped down into new roles or different roles or other places of ministry because they felt it was time to hand off. We developed plans for good endings, productive neutral zones, and great new beginnings. By the way, if you want that slide later, just send me an email and just say slide, and I'll send that to you. Now, both of these transitions that I'm talking about and these legacy seasons involve some thinking that I adapted from William Bridges. William Bridges wrote a very famous business-oriented change book called Transitions back in the late 80s, early 90s. It got updated several times before his death. And he says every successful transition involves 3 phases. There's an ending phase, and there's some emotional things attached to that. There's a neutral zone, and there are new beginnings. And what Bridges' key insight was this. He said, it's not the change that gets you, it's the transition. And transition is the emotional journey that you're on. And so we have some process and things that we use to help you think about your emotional journey as you transfer through these things. So are we going to talk about personal or church? Well, today we're going to talk about both. And I'm going to give you 2 ideas for 2022 for personal and 2 ideas for your church transition. So there's 2 questions on the personal side that I think we can ask. In the little booklet that I showed, which is the free resource, the Pastor Legacy Life Plan book. If you're in the US, we'll be happy to mail you one. Just email me at that address there. But one of the key areas is our relational, family and friends. That's one of the first areas. In fact, the reason we chose to start that area in the book is because most polls of Americans say that 70 to 75% of them find key meaning in relationships to their family and friends. This is a really important thing that many pastors miss, both in their personal planning for their legacy seasons and for the church planning in the legacy season. They neglect the fact that maybe they don't have as many friends as they thought they did, or maybe I want to develop some friendships as a couple, or to think forward for the future. So the first to-do thing that I would suggest to you to do in 2022 is to make a list of close relationships of family and friends that you either need to renew, establish, or repair. Sometimes this means some family members that you've become estranged to, whether that's children or cousins or brothers and sisters that you need to renew and refresh and reestablish relationships with. And sometimes that's a long process that we need to do that. Sometimes it's even your parents. Also, I've had several pastors find new meaning going back in time to a time when they were in their formative years, let's just say it that way, and renewing relationships with past people that they ran with in high school or college, and say, you know, we need to get reconnected, because there's going to come a day when you're going to find deep meaning in continuing and sustaining those relationships. I find many pastors don't have many close relationships within their church outside of the pastor and parishioner kind of roles. And so I think it's important to establish some meaning and meaningful relationships outside of those roles so that they can carry forward into the next season. So the action step there that I want you to take is to just make a list and say, what is my next step to renew, establish, or repair relationships with that person? You might sit down with your spouse and do that in early 2022. The second thing, and this is also in our booklet, is we talk about multifaceted health. And what we mean about multifaceted health is physical and emotional health. There's 7 areas in the book that we cover that you need to kind of work on a legacy plan for. But this is a great time to start saying, what is my physical health now, and what do I want it to be for my legacy season? You know, when I do succession planning, many of the pastors that I work with have not had a physical, a medical physical in several years. As you approach later stages of life, you need to have those physicals, just a little checkup and tune up to make sure everything is running well. Especially, I want to focus on, also ask them, how much exercise do they get? How much sleep do they get? And kind of what's their diet like? Now, I am not a diet Nazi. In fact, I'm a little bit overweight myself, and I'm not an exercise junkie. I try and get my steps in and get my walking in, but I am pretty rigorous on my sleep. And I find that those combinations of things lead to better mental and emotional health, better marriage health as well, to get those needful things. And many pastors I find have been sleep deprived over their careers. And so I want you to schedule a physical, that's the action step, and track your sleep. How many hours of sleep are you getting on a regular basis? I don't use the fancy watches and electronic tools. I just know that I need to get at least 8 hours of sleep to be fresh and ready for what the Lord has for me the next day. Now, I will admit, the Braves game went a little long last night, but thankfully it was a win. I hope we don't have any LA pastors on with us. Now let's move to legacy season planning for the church. And there's 2 things that I think you need to do in 2022, even if you're not thinking about this for some time in the future. Number 1, do you have an emergency plan? An emergency plan is something that should something happen to you. I'm going to a retirement party this evening. for the person who succeeded me in a role 25 years ago in our regional denominational office here. And unfortunately, my friend had a stroke earlier this year. There was no real emergency plan for what happens to the key leader role. I think every church also needs an emergency plan. What would happen if something took out the key leader? I always have churches review that once a year, or have boards review it once a year. It doesn't have to be a public plan, but there needs to be an emergency plan in place where if our pastor, our senior pastor, was incapacitated or removed from office, who's in charge? Who's the head of staff? How long does that last? What is the role of the board? What is the role of the staff in that? I've got a free template that I can send you that you can adapt. You'll need to let me know that you'd like one. Just send me an email. I'd love to send you the emergency plan template. That's also a good way to begin talking with your board about future legacy seasons and future succession plans. As long as having that plan, here's what we would do in an emergency. And then it opens the conversation as well to how we're thinking about succession long term. You may know this, but in public companies, it's required by the various SEC governance acts that every corporate board has to talk about succession once a year. I find about half large churches do that and half do not. I think it's a good, healthy practice. The second thing that you need to do on the church side is look at your governance documents. I can't tell you how many churches that I work with in succession planning that if you look at their actual governance documents, they were written for what the church was like 25 years ago. Or in the case of a founder church, they're very vague when it comes to pastor succession. So I think it's very important to update those governance documents ahead of time, or I help churches devise ways within the current governance structure that they can establish a healthy process for succession in the future. I know some of you are in denominations that have kind of strict protocols when it comes to governance and when it comes to succession planning. But what I've found in larger churches, mind you, is that many of the denominational offices and jurisdictions will work with a larger church in devising a succession plan that fits them, that also conforms to the governance factors. And there's some things we can do to help them realize that. So the governance document, check. I'm also willing to look at your governance documents and give you a few ideas there. Big things are who makes the decision, how is the decision made, what adjustments do we need to make to our governance documents to ensure a healthy succession process. Now, there's a couple free resources that I've already mentioned. We've got the free emergency plan template that I'm happy to send you. I'll also look at your governing documents and give you some quick suggestions. I did that twice already this week with churches that are not paying clients of mine, by the way. They just said, hey, would you take a look at this? There's also a free ebook about smart succession. It's about 40 pages. If you go to generis.com/Dave-Travis, you can get that one just with a click. Also, I've got a little tool that I use now. It takes about 15 minutes. It's called the free succession. It's the railroad presentation, which is really based on church succession. I'm happy to do that with you and a board member, you and your executive pastor, you and a couple of key leaders. It's a private thing. No one else has to know about it. The way you get in touch with me is go to dave.travis@generis.com. So let's review now the 4 things that you need to do in 2022. For personal legacy, I want you to make a list of close relationships that you need to renew, reestablish, or repair, or establish. Who are people you've always wanted to be friends with that you need to start building that relationship with? I want you to go get a physical or schedule a physical based on your insurance, or at least at minimum, track your exercise, your sleep, and your diet. And in your church succession plan, your church legacy season, I think the action steps, even if it's 10 years away, is what is our emergency plan? And do we have that well understood, at least with our board? And then let's look at our governing documents and make a few adjustments, or look and see if we need to make adjustments to that as we move to the future. Now, Christy, I think we've got a few minutes left. I will, if anyone wants to be brave and ask a question, I'm happy to do that. I haven't looked at our chat or Q&A panel.
So I did just drop in the chat that if someone wants to ask a question anonymously, you can do so in the Q&A feature. So I know that this can be, it's a candid subject.
We used to call this at Leadership Network when I was the leader there, a brown paper bag subject. No one wanted to talk about it directly. You had to hide it in a brown paper bag. So no one knew we were talking about it.
You need like a submission box.
Yes.
All right, so we actually don't have any questions. So I think if at this point, if none of our attendees want to submit a question, they have the opportunity to ask you questions by, I've already dropped your email address in the chat, dave.travis@generis.com. And I'm going to go ahead and send a follow-up email, just thanking everyone, but also linking how they can get connected with you directly, Dave, for that slide, or if they would love a copy of that book, which I will attest to what Dave just said. It is a small book. You can read it rather quickly. So
designed to read in 45 minutes.
It's a good one. All right. So Dave, I think we'll go ahead and let everyone go a few minutes early. I think we can all borrow some extra time. But I do want to say to everyone who is here, be sure to join us next Friday for our second session with Dave Roney. I love the title of this one, 4 Ways to Maximize Your Weekend Service Experience Without Killing Your Team. So
is it Friday or Thursday, Christy?
I'm so sorry. That is Thursday. I wrote the wrong information on my own notes. So sorry about that, guys. It will be next Thursday. And you can register for that at generis.com/5x22. That's /5x22. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.